Karoline Leavitt had always lived two different lives, though most people only knew about one of them. During the day, she worked in the busy world of politics and communications. She attended meetings, wrote speeches, and helped organize events. People saw her as a confident young woman who knew how to handle pressure and speak in front of crowds. But when the sun went down and her workday ended, Karoline would drive home to her small house in New Hampshire. There, sitting in her quiet living room, was an old piano that had belonged to her grandmother. This piano held her biggest secret. Every evening, she would sit on the worn wooden bench and let her fingers dance across the keys, playing beautiful classical music that seemed to come straight from her heart. This love for music started when she was just 7 years old. Her mother had signed her up for piano lessons with Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind elderly woman who lived 3 blocks away. While other kids played video games or watched cartoons, Karoline spent hours practicing scales and learning to read sheet music. She had natural talent that amazed everyone who heard her play. As the years passed, Karoline got better and better. She could play pieces by famous composers like Mozart and Beethoven with ease. Her fingers moved across the keys like she was born to play piano. Mrs. Rodriguez often told her parents that Karoline had the skills to become a professional musician if she wanted to. However, when it came time to choose her future, Karoline faced a difficult decision. Her family encouraged her to pursue a stable career, something that would guarantee a good income and security. Music was beautiful, they said, but it was risky. Not everyone could make a living as a pianist. So Karoline chose the practical path and went into politics and communications. Still, she never stopped playing. The piano remained her escape, her way to relax after stressful days at work. She would play for hours, losing herself in the music, and forgetting about deadlines, phone calls, and all the pressure of her job. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she had chosen music instead, but she kept these thoughts to herself. One cold evening in March, Karoline received an invitation that would change everything. The envelope was thick and expensive, with elegant gold lettering. Inside was an invitation to a charity event in New York City. The gala was being held to raise money for music education in schools, and several important people from her work had been invited. The event was scheduled for the following Saturday at the Metropolitan Arts Center, one of the most beautiful venues in the city. Karoline had been to many professional events before, but this one felt different. Maybe it was because the cause was so close to her heart, or maybe it was the excitement of being in such a fancy place surrounded by people who loved music as much as she did. She spent the week preparing for the event, choosing the right dress, and reading about the charity they were supporting. The organization helped provide musical instruments and lessons to children who couldn't afford them. Reading their stories reminded Karoline of her own childhood and how lucky she had been to have piano lessons. Saturday arrived with a mix of rain and sunshine, typical spring weather in New York. Karoline took the train from Boston, watching the landscape change from small towns to busy suburbs to the towering buildings of Manhattan. She felt nervous but excited, like she was about to step into a different world. The Metropolitan Arts Center was even more impressive than she had imagined. The building was over 100 years old, with marble columns and crystal chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds. Well-dressed people moved through the grand lobby, their voices creating a pleasant buzz of conversation mixed with the soft sound of classical music playing in the background. Karoline checked her coat and smoothed her navy blue dress. She had chosen something elegant but not too flashy, wanting to fit in with the sophisticated crowd. As she walked into the main reception area, she noticed small groups of people talking and laughing while servers moved between them offering champagne and small appetizers. The evening started with a cocktail hour, giving guests time to mingle and learn about the charity's work. Karoline found herself talking to various people about music education and the importance of keeping arts programs in schools. She felt comfortable discussing these topics, though she was careful not to mention her own musical background. During one of these conversations, she met Dr. Patricia Williams, a music professor from Columbia University. Dr. Williams was passionate about her work and loved talking about how music could change young people's lives. They discussed different teaching methods and the challenges facing music programs in public schools. As they talked, Dr. Williams mentioned that the evening's featured performer was Victor Steinway, a world-famous pianist who had performed with major orchestras around the globe. Victor was known for his incredible technical skill and his ability to bring classical pieces to life in ways that moved audiences to tears. However, Dr. Williams also warned Karoline about Victor's personality. While he was undoubtedly talented, he had a reputation for being difficult and sometimes rude to people he considered beneath his level. Several musicians had stories about Victor making harsh comments about their abilities, especially if they weren't professional performers. Just as Dr. Williams finished speaking, a tall man with perfectly styled gray hair approached their group. He wore an expensive black suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. This was Victor Steinway himself. Victor joined the conversation smoothly, and Dr. Williams introduced Karoline as someone who worked in political communications. The introduction seemed innocent enough, but something in Victor's eyes changed when he heard about Karoline's career. He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. The conversation continued pleasantly for a few minutes, with Victor sharing stories about his recent performances in Europe. He spoke with passion about the classical pieces he had been playing and the different concert halls where he had performed. Karoline listened with genuine interest, appreciating his knowledge and experience. Then someone in the group mentioned how wonderful it was that people from all different careers came together to support music education. An older gentleman commented that he had heard many guests at the event played instruments themselves, even if they weren't professional musicians. This comment seemed to catch Victor's attention. He looked around the group with raised eyebrows and asked if anyone there played an instrument. Dr. Williams mentioned that she played violin, though she was quick to say she was much better at teaching than performing. When the question came to Karoline, she hesitated for a moment. She could have easily said no and avoided any attention. But something about the evening and being surrounded by people who loved music made her feel more open than usual. She quietly mentioned that she played piano and had been taking lessons since childhood. She tried to say it casually, not wanting to make a big deal about it. But Victor's reaction was immediate and unexpected. His friendly expression disappeared, replaced by a look that was half amusement and half annoyance. He let out a small laugh that didn't sound pleasant at all. The other people in the group seemed to sense that something had changed in the conversation. Victor began asking Karoline questions about her musical background, but not in a friendly way. He wanted to know where she had studied, who her teachers were, and what pieces she could play. His tone suggested that he already knew the answers wouldn't impress him. When Karoline explained that she had learned from a local teacher and mostly played for her own enjoyment, Victor's expression grew even more dismissive. He made a comment about how refreshing it was to meet someone who understood that piano was just a hobby for most people. The conversation took an uncomfortable turn as Victor began talking about the difference between real musicians and people who just played around with instruments in their spare time. He spoke about the years of dedication, the hours of daily practice, and the sacrifices required to truly master classical music. While his words weren't directly insulting, everyone in the group could feel the underlying message Victor was making it clear that he didn't consider Karoline a real musician, and that her political career proved she wasn't serious about music. Dr. Williams tried to change the subject, but Victor seemed determined to make his point. He talked about how he had met many people over the years who claimed to play piano, but few who actually understood what classical music demanded. Karoline felt her cheeks getting warm as she realized that other people nearby were starting to listen to the conversation. Victor's voice had gotten louder and his comments were drawing attention from other guests. The situation became even more uncomfortable when Victor made a joke about politicians who thought they understood art. He suggested that people in government were usually too busy with practical matters to develop any real appreciation for the finer things in life. Other guests began to gather around, sensing drama in the air. Some seemed entertained by Victor's comments, while others looked uncomfortable with his behavior. Karoline found herself at the center of attention in a way she had never expected. Victor concluded his impromptu speech by saying that he respected people who knew their limitations. He suggested that there was nothing wrong with enjoying music as a listener, rather than pretending to be something you weren't. The group fell silent, and Karoline realized that everyone was looking at her, waiting to see how she would respond to what had essentially been a public dismissal of her musical abilities. In that moment, standing in the elegant reception hall surrounded by people she barely knew, Karoline made a decision that would change everything. Instead of walking away or making excuses, she looked Victor directly in the eyes and said something that surprised everyone, including herself. She calmly asked if there would be an opportunity for guests to perform during the evening, since it was, after all, an event celebrating music education and the joy of musical expression. The silence that followed Karoline's question seemed to last forever. Victor's eyebrows shot up in surprise, and the small crowd that had gathered around them looked shocked. Nobody had expected the quiet young woman to speak up after being so clearly dismissed. Victor recovered quickly from his surprise, and his expression shifted to one of pure amusement. He let out a laugh that echoed through the reception hall, causing even more people to turn and look in their direction. His laugh wasn't mean exactly, but it wasn't kind either. It was the kind of laugh someone makes when they think they've heard something ridiculous. He looked around at the other guests with a smile that suggested he was about to say something entertaining. Then he turned back to Karoline and said that yes, there was indeed a piano available for the evening's entertainment. The venue always kept their beautiful grand piano ready for special occasions. Victor's tone made it clear that he thought this was all very amusing. He spoke slowly, as if he was explaining something to a child. He told Karoline that if she really wanted to perform, he would be happy to arrange it. After all, he said with a grin, everyone deserved a chance to share their talents, whatever level those talents might be. The way he said it made several people in the crowd shift uncomfortably. Dr. Williams looked worried and tried to suggest that perhaps it wasn't necessary, but Victor waved her concerns away, saying that it would be wonderful to have some variety in the evening's entertainment. Karoline felt her heart beating fast, but she kept her voice steady as she accepted Victor's offer. She thanked him politely and said she would be honored to perform for such a distinguished audience. Her calm response seemed to surprise Victor even more than her original question had. As the crowd began to disperse and move toward the dining area for dinner, word of the upcoming performance spread quickly through the event. By the time people were seated for the meal, nearly everyone in attendance had heard about the exchange between Victor and the young woman from New Hampshire. During dinner, Karoline found it difficult to concentrate on the conversations around her table. Her mind kept racing, thinking about what she had just committed to doing. She had played in front of people before, but never in a setting like this, and never after being so publicly challenged. The charitable speeches and auction items that normally would have held her attention felt like background noise. She kept glancing toward the stage area where a magnificent black grand piano sat waiting. The instrument was beautiful, clearly well-maintained, and probably worth more than most people's cars. As the evening progressed, she noticed people pointing her out to their friends and whispering. Some looked excited, as if they were about to witness something entertaining. Others seemed concerned, perhaps feeling sorry for her and what they expected would be an embarrassing moment. Victor, meanwhile, seemed to be enjoying himself immensely. He moved through the room during dinner, charming guests with stories about his international performances. Karoline noticed that he mentioned the upcoming amateur performance several times, always with that same amused smile. When the formal dinner portion ended and people began to move back toward the reception area for coffee and desserts, Karoline excused herself. She told her table mates that she needed a few minutes to prepare, trying to sound more confident than she felt. She found a quiet corner near the restrooms where she could think clearly. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she took several deep breaths to calm herself. She thought about all the evenings she had spent at her grandmother's old piano, playing the same pieces over and over until they became part of her. The piece she had decided to perform was one she knew by heart. Chopin's Ballad, No. 1 in G minor, had been her favorite for years. It was challenging enough to showcase real skill, but familiar enough that she could play it even when nervous. The piece told a story through music, starting quietly and building to powerful, dramatic moments before ending with gentle beauty. She had first learned this piece when she was 16, spending an entire summer working through its difficult passages with Mrs. Rodriguez. Her old teacher had explained that the ballade wasn't just about hitting the right notes at the right time. It was about understanding the emotions behind the music and sharing those feelings with anyone who listened. As Karoline stood in that quiet corner, she could almost hear Mrs. Rodriguez's voice encouraging her. Her teacher had always said that music wasn't about impressing people or proving anything. It was about sharing something beautiful and meaningful with the world. This memory helped calm her nerves. She wasn't performing to prove Victor wrong or to show off. She was performing because she loved music and wanted to share that love with others, even if some of them didn't expect much from her. When she returned to the main reception area, she found that a small stage area had been set up near the piano. Victor was already there speaking with the event organizers about the evening's entertainment. When he saw Karoline approaching, he smiled and announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear that their special guest performer was ready. The way he said, "special guest performer," made it clear that he still didn't take her seriously. But Karoline had made peace with that. She knew that Victor's opinion didn't change her love for music or her years of dedicated practice. Victor took the microphone and addressed the crowd, which had grown larger as word continued to spread about the unusual evening entertainment. He introduced himself briefly, mentioning his recent performances and upcoming concert dates. Then he turned his attention to Karoline. His introduction was polite, but subtly dismissive. He spoke about how wonderful it was when people from all walks of life shared their passion for music. He mentioned Karoline's work in political communications and praised her courage for volunteering to perform in front of such an experienced audience. Everything he said sounded complimentary on the surface, but the undertone was clear. He was setting low expectations and preparing the audience for what he assumed would be an amateur performance. Some people in the crowd seemed to pick up on this, while others appeared genuinely excited to hear someone new. As Victor handed her the microphone, Karoline felt surprisingly calm. All her nervousness from earlier seemed to have faded away. She thanked the audience for their attention and briefly explained her choice of music. She told them about Chopin's ballade and how it had been a favorite of hers for many years. She mentioned that the piece was known for its emotional depth and technical challenges, but that she hoped they would enjoy her interpretation of this beautiful work. Her brief introduction was simple and sincere, without any attempt to oversell her abilities or make excuses for what was to come. This genuine approach seemed to win over at least some members of the audience, who responded with encouraging applause. As Karoline walked toward the piano, she noticed Victor positioning himself where he would have a clear view of both her and the audience. His expression suggested that he was looking forward to being proven right about amateur musicians. The piano bench was adjusted to exactly the right height, and Karoline took a moment to test the feel of the keys. The instrument was even more responsive than she had expected, with a rich, full tone that would make even simple melodies sound beautiful. She positioned her hands over the keyboard and took one final deep breath. In that moment before she began to play, the entire room seemed to hold its breath with her. Conversations stopped, glasses stopped clinking, and even the servers paused in their work. This was the moment that would determine everything. In a few seconds, she would either prove Victor's assumptions correct or show everyone in that elegant room that sometimes people are much more than they appear to be. Karoline thought one last time about all those quiet evenings at home, playing this same piece while the rest of the world went about its business. All those hours of practice, all that love for the music, had led to this single moment. She pressed the first keys gently, and the opening notes of Chopin's ballade began to fill the room. The melody started softly, almost questioningly, like someone beginning to tell a story they weren't sure anyone wanted to hear. But as the first phrase continued, something remarkable began to happen. The notes weren't just technically correct. They were full of emotion and understanding. Each phrase seemed to flow naturally into the next, creating a musical conversation that drew the audience in completely. Victor's confident smirk began to fade as he realized that what he was hearing wasn't amateur playing. This was something much more sophisticated and genuine than he had expected. The young woman at the piano wasn't just hitting the right notes. She was making music in the truest sense of the word. The opening notes of Chopin's ballade flowed from the piano like water from a gentle stream. Karoline's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that surprised everyone watching. The melody began softly, almost like a whisper, but it carried a weight that made people lean forward in their seats. Victor stood near the side of the stage, his arms crossed and that familiar smirk still on his face. He had heard countless amateur performances over the years, and he expected this one to follow the same pattern. Usually, nervous performers would rush through the difficult parts or play too loudly to cover up their mistakes. But something was different about what he was hearing. The opening section of the ballad requires incredible control and understanding. It's not about playing fast or loud. It's about telling a story through subtle changes in timing and touch. Most amateur pianists struggle with this delicate beginning, but Karoline seemed completely at ease. The audience, which had been politely attentive at first, began to show signs of genuine interest. Conversations stopped completely. People put down their coffee cups and turned their full attention to the woman at the piano. Even the servers, who had been quietly clearing tables, paused in their work to listen. As the first section of the ballade continued, Karoline's confidence grew. She could feel the music flowing through her just as it had during all those quiet evenings at home. The difference was that now she had an audience who was truly listening, and their attention seemed to inspire her to play even better than usual. Dr. Williams, who had tried to discourage the performance earlier, found herself amazed by what she was hearing. She had taught music for over 20 years, and could immediately recognize the difference between someone who simply knew the notes and someone who understood the deeper meaning of the piece. The first major shift in the ballade comes about 2 minutes into the piece when the gentle opening theme gives way to a more dramatic section. This transition is one of the most challenging parts for any pianist, requiring perfect timing and a complete change in emotional expression. Karoline handled this transition flawlessly. Her left hand began the deeper, more serious bass line, while her right hand carried the melody to new heights. The change wasn't sudden or jarring. Instead, it felt like a natural evolution of the story the music was telling. Victor's expression began to change. The smirk faded from his face, replaced by something that looked like confusion. He uncrossed his arms and took a step closer to the piano, as if he needed to see as well as hear what was happening. The middle section of Chopin's ballade is where many pianists struggle the most. It requires both technical skill and emotional maturity. The music becomes more complex, with rapid runs and difficult chord progressions that can easily sound messy if not handled properly. But Karoline sailed through these challenges as if they were second nature. Her years of practice were evident in every note. More importantly, she wasn't just playing the correct notes at the correct time. She was interpreting the music, making choices about phrasing and dynamics that showed deep understanding of Chopin's intentions. The audience was completely captivated now. Some people had tears in their eyes as they listened to the beautiful melodies and harmonies. Others simply sat in amazement, wondering how they had so completely misjudged the quiet young woman who had seemed so ordinary during dinner. One elderly gentleman, a retired music critic who had heard some of the greatest pianists of his generation, whispered to his wife that this was remarkable playing. He said it reminded him of why he had fallen in love with classical music in the first place. As the performance continued, Victor found himself experiencing something he hadn't felt in years. He was genuinely moved by another person's playing. Usually, when he listened to music, his mind automatically analyzed technique and noted flaws. But Karoline's performance was so honest and beautiful that he found himself simply enjoying the music. The ballade reached its most challenging section, where Chopin demands that the pianist execute rapid, difficult passages while maintaining the emotional intensity of the piece. These moments separate good pianists from great ones, and many professionals struggle with this part of the composition. Karoline approached these difficulties with calm confidence. Her fingers flew across the keys, but every note was clear and purposeful. She never rushed or stumbled even during the most complex passages. Her technique was so solid that the difficult parts sounded effortless. But technique alone wasn't what made her performance special. It was her ability to communicate the emotions behind the music. When the piece called for tenderness, her touch became gentle and caring. When it demanded power and drama, she delivered with conviction but never with harshness. Dr. Williams found herself thinking about her own students and wondering how many of them would ever achieve this level of musical understanding. She realized that Karoline possessed something that couldn't be taught easily. She had natural musical instincts that allowed her to connect with the composer's intentions in a very personal way. The performance was building toward its climax, the most powerful and dramatic section of the entire ballade. This is where Chopin pulls out all the stops, creating music that can shake the walls and move hearts simultaneously. It requires enormous technical skill, but more importantly, it demands emotional courage from the performer. Karoline seemed to grow larger as she approached this climactic section. Her posture straightened, her movements became more confident, and her connection to the music deepened even further. She wasn't just playing Chopin's notes anymore. She was channeling his passion and making it her own. The powerful chords rang out through the reception hall with a clarity and strength that surprised everyone. The piano, excellent as it was, seemed to be responding to Karoline's touch in ways that brought out its very best qualities. Each note sang with perfect tone and balance. Victor was no longer analyzing or critiquing. He was completely absorbed in the performance, experiencing the same sense of wonder that he had felt as a young boy when he first heard great classical music. He had forgotten what it felt like to be surprised and moved by someone else's playing. As the climax reached its peak, some audience members were openly weeping. The combination of Chopin's genius and Karoline's interpretation had created something truly special. It was one of those rare moments when music transcends entertainment and becomes a deeply moving human experience. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Karoline's performance was how she handled the ending of the ballade. After all the drama and power of the climactic section, Chopin brings the piece back to quiet beauty. This return to gentleness requires incredible sensitivity and control. Many pianists, exhausted by the demands of the dramatic sections, struggle to recapture the delicate touch needed for the ending. But Karoline made the transition seem natural and inevitable. Her playing became tender again, but with a depth of feeling that hadn't been there at the beginning. The final notes of the ballade hung in the air like morning mist. Karoline's hands remained poised over the keys for a moment, as if she was reluctant to let the music end completely. Then she slowly lifted her hands and sat back slightly, her part of the evening's story now complete. The silence that followed was different from the silence before she had begun playing. This wasn't the polite quiet of people waiting to hear something. This was the profound silence of people who had just experienced something beautiful and needed a moment to process what they had heard. Victor stood frozen in place, his mouth slightly open. All his assumptions about amateur musicians, about people who pursued other careers, about what constituted real musical understanding, had been completely shattered in the space of 12 minutes. Dr. Williams had tears streaming down her cheeks. She had spent her entire career teaching music and explaining its importance to others, but she had rarely heard a performance that demonstrated so clearly why classical music mattered so much. The elderly music critic sat in stunned silence, already composing in his mind the review he would write about this unexpected and extraordinary performance. He knew that he had witnessed something special, the kind of musical moment that people would talk about for years to come. Other audience members looked around at each other with expressions of amazement and joy. Many of them had expected to hear a pleasant but unremarkable performance by an amateur. Instead, they had experienced something that would stay with them long after they returned home. Karoline remained seated at the piano, looking calm but slightly overwhelmed by what had just happened. She had poured her heart into the performance, sharing something deeply personal with a room full of strangers. Now she waited to see how they would respond to her gift of music. The moment stretched on, filled with the kind of anticipation that comes when everyone knows something important has just occurred. But nobody wants to be the first to break the spell with applause or words. The silence lasted for what felt like forever. Karoline sat at the piano, her hands resting gently in her lap, looking out at the crowd of people who were all staring back at her. She could see the surprise and wonder on their faces, but she wasn't sure what would happen next. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, one person began to clap. The sound was slow at first, deliberate and respectful. Within seconds, another person joined in, then another. Soon the entire room erupted in applause that seemed to shake the walls of the elegant venue. People weren't just clapping politely the way they might after any performance. They were standing up, their faces showing genuine emotion and amazement. Some wiped tears from their eyes while they applauded. Others shook their heads in disbelief as if they couldn't quite believe what they had just heard. The applause went on and on, growing louder instead of fading away. Karoline stood up from the piano bench, feeling overwhelmed by the response. She had hoped her performance would go well, but she had never expected anything like this reaction. Victor remained frozen in place for several more seconds, even as everyone around him clapped enthusiastically. His whole world had just been turned upside down. Everything he thought he knew about music and talent and who deserved to be taken seriously had been challenged in the most beautiful way possible. Finally, he began to move. But instead of joining the applause, he walked directly toward the piano where Karoline was standing. The crowd grew quieter as they noticed Victor approaching, curious to see what the famous pianist would do next. When Victor reached Karoline, he stopped right in front of her. For a moment, they just looked at each other. She could see that his eyes were different now. The arrogance and dismissiveness from earlier in the evening were completely gone, replaced by something that looked like respect and even admiration. Victor took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only Karoline and the people closest to them could hear. He told her that he owed her an apology. He said that he had been completely wrong about her abilities and that he was sorry for the way he had treated her earlier. But Victor wasn't finished. He raised his voice so that everyone in the room could hear what he said next. He told the entire audience that he had just witnessed something truly remarkable. He said that Karoline's performance was not just good for an amateur, but genuinely excellent by any standard. He went on to say that in all his years of performing and listening to classical music, he had rarely heard anyone capture the heart of Chopin's ballade so perfectly. He admitted that he had made assumptions based on her career and background, and that those assumptions had been proven magnificently wrong. The audience responded to Victor's words with another wave of applause, this time directed at both musicians. People seemed to appreciate Victor's honesty and humility as much as they had enjoyed Karoline's performance. Dr. Williams pushed through the crowd to reach them, her face still wet with tears. She hugged Karoline warmly and told her that she had just given one of the most moving performances she had heard in years. She said that Karoline had reminded everyone in the room why they loved music in the first place. As word spread through the venue about what had happened, more people gathered around Karoline. They wanted to congratulate her, ask her questions, and share how her performance had affected them. Many admitted that they had expected very little when Victor first announced there would be an amateur performance. The elderly music critic introduced himself and asked Karoline about her musical background. When she explained about her childhood, lessons and years of private practice, he nodded knowingly. He told her that genuine talent combined with dedicated practice could produce results that formal training alone never could. Several people began taking photos and videos wanting to capture this unexpected moment. Some were already posting on social media, sharing clips of the performance with captions about how they had just witnessed something amazing at a charity event. One woman approached Karoline with tears in her eyes and explained that she had given up piano lessons as a child because she thought she wasn't good enough. She said that watching Karoline's performance had inspired her to think about taking lessons again as an adult. Another guest, a businessman who confessed he usually found classical music boring, said that Karoline's playing had made him understand, for the first time, why people got so excited about this type of music. He asked her to recommend some recordings he could listen to. As the evening continued, Victor stayed close to Karoline, seeming genuinely interested in learning more about her musical journey. He asked her about her favorite composers, what pieces she enjoyed playing most, and how she had developed such a deep understanding of classical music without formal conservatory training. Karoline found herself enjoying these conversations more than she had expected. For years, she had kept her musical passion separate from her professional life, never talking about it with colleagues or business contacts. But now she was surrounded by people who understood and appreciated her love for music. Victor surprised everyone by suggesting that Karoline should consider performing more often. He said that talent like hers deserved to be shared with wider audiences, not hidden away in private practice sessions. He even offered to help her make connections with concert organizers and music venues. Dr. Williams agreed enthusiastically, saying that there were many venues that would welcome a performer of Karoline's caliber. She mentioned community concert, series, charity events, and even some smaller professional venues that featured emerging artists. As the official charity event began to wind down, people continued to approach Karoline throughout the evening. Some shared their own musical stories. Others simply wanted to thank her for such a beautiful performance. Many exchanged contact information with her, saying they hoped to hear her play again someday. The event organizers were thrilled with how the evening had turned out. They said that Karoline's unexpected performance had created exactly the kind of memorable moment that people would associate with their charity for years to come. They invited her to perform at their next fundraising event. When Karoline finally left the venue that night, she felt like a completely different person than the one who had arrived hours earlier. She had come to the event as a political professional who happened to love music. She was leaving as someone who had been publicly recognized as a serious musician. The train ride back to Boston gave her time to think about everything that had happened. She looked at her phone and saw dozens of messages from friends and colleagues who had seen videos of her performance online. The clips were being shared widely, with many people expressing amazement at her hidden talent. Over the next few days, Karoline received more invitations to perform than she could have imagined. Local venues wanted to book her for concerts. Other charity organizations asked if she would consider playing at their events. A few professional musicians reached out to suggest collaborations, but perhaps the most meaningful response came from her old piano teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had seen a video of the performance online. Her former teacher called to say how proud she was and how wonderful it was to see Karoline sharing her gift with the world. The experience had changed Karoline's perspective on her own life. She realized that she didn't have to choose between her professional career and her musical passion. There were ways to honor both parts of herself, and the positive response to her performance had shown her that people valued authenticity and hidden talents. She began incorporating music into her professional life in small ways. At political events, she sometimes played brief pieces to open or close gatherings. She found that music helped her connect with audiences in a more personal way than speeches alone could achieve. Victor, true to his word, introduced Karoline to several people. In the music world, some of these connections led to performance opportunities that allowed her to share her love of classical music with new audiences while maintaining her day job. The story of that evening at the charity gala became something people talked about for months afterward. It reminded everyone who heard it that talent and passion can be found in the most unexpected places, and that it's dangerous to make assumptions about what people are capable of achieving. For Karoline, the experience taught her that hiding her talents hadn't protected her from anything. Instead, it had prevented her from sharing something beautiful with the world. She learned that being vulnerable and authentic, even when it felt risky, could lead to connections and opportunities she never could have imagined. Most importantly, she discovered that she didn't have to be just one thing. She could be a political, professional, and a serious musician. She could be practical and artistic. She could be all the different parts of herself without having to choose just one identity. The evening that had started with embarrassment and challenge had become a turning point that opened up new possibilities she had never considered before.